I'm a man of many words. I'm a man of many words. It's not often that I'm at a loss for words, to tell you the truth. But by the way, we're about to hit 7 hours. We just hit 7 hours of this live stream. I think what I want to say in response to that interview, and thanks Beth for taking the time. She's a what can I say? She's an amazing person. Jen text messaged me. Jen text messaged me while watching that. And by the way, when we air these things, it's the first time Jen's seeing it. When I aired Jen's videos, it's the first time I'm seeing it. So I'm watching it right when you're watching it. Jen said it's amazing how these normal people, these normal residents, have to become water experts. They're forced to become water experts because they're being poisoned. And what I think is really important about the things that she said, you know, we know that Republicans don't care about anything. They don't care about how any policies affect other people. The only time they start to care is when it happens in their backyard and they care. Frankly, the same thing with Democratic politicians too. They care, for the most part, they care when it affects them. But unfortunately, and I'm not saying this to fearmonger, I'm saying it because I've done enough research at this point. I've covered enough stories in the field. Unfortunately, this isn't just Flint, and it's not just North Carolina, and it's not just Indiana, and it's not just Ohio, it's not just West Virginia, it's not just Florida. There's water problems in every single state in this country. And the scary part is, majority of you don't know. Majority of people don't know. Because our media in this country is not real journalism. It's essentially theatrics masquerading as journalism. And the reason that we just hit 7 hours of this Sunday marathon. The reason that I spend longer than, I spend way longer than 7 hours. I mean, I'm preparing for this live stream hours before I go live on Sunday. And I'm also preparing part of Saturday. The reason that I fight as hard as I do, the reason that right now I'm working 7 days a week, the reason that Jen fights as hard as she does, the reason that Ty fights as hard as he fights, the reason that I've sacrificed a lot of my life for this job is because it's not a job to me, it's a purpose. And you really have to be a total lunatic. You'd have to be a complete sociopath to meet people like Beth and not want to fight for those people. You'd have to be a complete sociopath. And I want to tell you, I was very much like you. I was very much like you before I joined the Young Turks. And this isn't, this isn't about the Young Turks, but I was living in my own little bubble, in New York. I never traveled the country before I joined the Young Turks, but I had the fortune of, having the investment. They had the money to send me out on the country, and my world was rocked. My world was rocked learning this information. My world was rocked and is continually rocked. Sure, I'm not surprised by any of this because I've seen too much, but I'm still, every single time I hear one of these stories, I mean, this woman, I'm not a doctor, I can't say 100% she miscarried because of the water, but you have all these people in Flint and now North Carolina miscarrying babies. This is a marathon runner. This is a marathon runner. Did you see all the medals she had behind her? This is a healthy woman. I think she's in her, I should have asked, I think she's in her late 20s or early 30s. She's a marathon runner. And she drank a hell of a lot of water because she is a marathon runner. And they were dumping this toxic, cancer-causing chemical in her drinking water source since before she was born. And her government didn't tell her, because her government is bought off by the very corporation that the government is allowing to poison her. She might have had a child named Samuel right now. If not for genocidal corporations. Let's call it what it is. These are genocidal corporate criminals. You have women losing babies. You have increases in thyroid dysfunction in this very region. I reported on this earlier this week. You have an increase in thyroid problems and thyroid cancer in the very path of the Cape Fear River, from Fayetteville down to Wilmington. You think that's a coincidence that the worst thyroid problems in North Carolina are in the path of the Cape Fear River? You think it's a coincidence that more people have cancer in this region? You think it's a coincidence more people have kidney problems? You want to fucking talk about Russia all day? Your sister or your brother or your son or your daughter or your mother or your father or your friend or your fucking mailman might have contaminants in their body that they would have absolutely no way of knowing about. Because companies like DuPont are not companies. Companies like DuPont are employers. And you know who their employees are? Do you know who DuPont / Chemours, you know who their employees is? The United States government. The government doesn't work for you. The government doesn't work for me. It works for the corporations. All you have to do is follow the money. So when Barack Obama goes to Flint and drinks a glass of filtered water and says, well, I'm told by the EPA that it's safe to drink. Well, the EPA is the very agency that looked the other way as the state of Michigan poisoned those residents. And the state of North Carolina, you know who they're letting test the Cape Fear River to see how high is the contamination? How high is the contamination of this chemical that they've been dumping in the water? You know who they're letting test the water? The very company that dumped the cancer-causing chemicals in the water in the first place. Yeah, let's ask the bank robber to do the investigation on who robbed the bank. Let's let the police department to investigate their officer that shot the black man dead. When does it stop? You know, frankly, folks, I am a huge advocate of peaceful protest. I don't believe armed violence. I don't believe armed violence is helpful, and I actually think it's more hurtful. Because the very people that poison women like Beth, the very people that are screwing you, the very people that are stealing your money and giving it to Trump's donors and Democratic donors, they wish you would be violent. Because they're prepared for it. Trust me, they're prepared for violent resurrection. Because then they could paint you as the radicals. Then they could paint themselves as the victims. It's happened in history in the past. So I'm a very big proponent of nonviolent protest. But at this point, I think we need to go further than nonviolent protest. Again, to be clear, I'm not talking about violence. Violence is not acceptable, period, under any circumstances. Under any circumstances. Ruth says armed violence only gives them a reason to kill you. Agreed. And it gives them a reason to paint you as the aggressor and as the culprit. I think we're at a point in this country, whether it's the water, whether it's the minimum wage, whether it's the police brutality, whether it's the corporate theft, whether it's companies like Walmart, whether it's state and local government basically stealing your money. That's what they're doing when they give tax cuts to their rich donors. They're stealing your money because they're cutting your Medicaid and they're cutting your heating during the winter, and they're raising, you get little tax cuts, little tax increases that you don't even see to pay for those tax cuts for the rich, to pay for that deregulation. They got to make up the money somewhere. Honestly, I think we're at a point in this country that working people need to go on a general strike. I really think we're at that point. I think we need a general strike in this country. I know it's a scary thing. I know it's a scary thing to say, well, I can't afford to go on strike and not work. What if then I won't be able to pay my rent? But I got to tell you something. If enough of a movement is created to go on a general strike, I'm talking don't show up for work. I mean, I'm not talking about like nurses and doctors and like essential workers to health and emergency services. We need you to work. But, for example, that March for Our Lives protest, which was great. High school students from Parkland created a huge protest against gun terrorism. But we can't sustain anymore on one-off protests. We need to have working people. And by the way, I'm talking progressives, I'm talking conservatives that are getting screwed. A lot of Donald Trump supporters that are conservative, they didn't vote for him only because he's racist. They voted for him because they're economically desperate and pissed off that their jobs were sold. The only way, when I say follow the money, it's because this country is run on money and greed. So if people don't show up to work, if people stop buying these products that these companies are making and poisoning you while they're making them with no regulation, if people stop participating in this corrupt, if people stop participating in this corrupt system, because capitalism is killing us. Capitalism is killing us. Nancy Pelosi says we're capitalists. Well, it's killing us. It's making women lose their children. It's making people get cancer. It's making people get kidneys problems, thyroid problems, reproductive problems. Go on and on and on. Bottom line, the corporations have stolen your government. The corporations have stolen your government, and the only way you're going to get it back is if you start to hit them where it counts, and that's the money. It's the money, Lebowski. It's the money. This is why people like Shaun King and other African American leaders have said, we don't only need to protest screaming Black Lives Matter, we need to start in de-investing in these businesses that are supporting the police. No problem, Wallace. Thanks for donating. So, it's not enough to protest once in a blue moon. We need to have protests not just at federal and state capitals. We need to have protests not for a day, every day outside places like DuPont. Frankly, there needs to be protests outside a lot of these media companies who don't cover it because the media are accomplices to the crime. When the media doesn't cover these things, can you believe what she just said? That this woman who has been poisoned in North Carolina has been told by the media, well, we're kind of done with the water crisis. We did that. It's like saying you're done with the Holocaust. You know, if the media, oh, well, we already covered the Jews going on the train, so we're kind of done with that. We're moving on to the fall fashion catalog in Germany. I mean, it's outrageous. I've been to Flint 13 times, and I would have went back probably 13 more if I had the funding to do it. And I've been criticized for that. Jordan, go cover other things. Well, I am covering other things, but I'm only one person. I'm only one person. You don't stop covering something because you know you did it once, so we're covered. I mean, Jen and I can tell you, and I have told you, we met with Newsweek magazine, which they're terrible in their own way, because Newsweek was going to cover our Flint bombshell. Jen, if you don't mind putting the link in the chat one more time if you haven't read the story. We met with Newsweek in person in New York City. They were like a deer in the headlights because they weren't they never followed up on Flint. They, like Rachel Maddow and all the other outlets who went there for a week in 2016, they covered it then, and then they said, okay, we checked the box. We're done. It was like having to explain it. Having to explain all our reporting and everything we found, it was like having to explain it to a 5-year-old. These people were so fucking stupid.